Okay, I'll kick off. Well, welcome to the first open session of Host City Conference. I hope you've enjoyed the main stage content this morning. The format's a little different in this format. My name is Iain Edmondson. I'm a director of Legacy Delivery Limited and one of the directors of the International Association of Event Hosts. In this session, we'll be sharing some of the work that the Association of Summer Olympic Federations and the International Association of Event Hosts have been doing throughout this year while we've had the period of disruption, and focusing on how we measure the value of events relating to the broader topics, some of which were covered by this morning's speakers. So not just economic, but engaging local, national, international audiences for social and sustainable outcomes. The session is going to consist of a presentation by Jidong Wang from ASOIF and myself, and you'll see a snapshot of the detail, which is actually going to be shared more widely when it's published around spring next year. You'll also hear perspectives from host organisations, rights owners, and commercial research consultants. So that includes Kim Mejnert, Frydensbjerg from wonderful Copenhagen, James Savage from Deloitte Sport Business, Mark Stewart from EventScotland, and Maria Ramos from World Athletics. Please use the chat box to the right. Hopefully you're a bit more familiar with that one this morning. It should be set on the session rather than the overall event tab. And you can put a little capital Q before your question. It makes it easier to identify when it comes to asking questions after the presentation. So without further ado, I'll go straight into the next 15 minutes or so of presentation, and welcome Jidong Wang from ASOIF. Jidong.
Okay, so thank you, Iain, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jidong from ASOIF. We are the umbrella association of the International Sports Federations of the Summer Olympic Games, and we always aim to protect our members' interests by providing them with solutions in various aspects. In terms of today's topic, so back in 2017, we decided to work with SportCal in order to provide our members with with an opportunity to conduct a series of event impact evaluation studies, and the final report was delivered earlier this year. During this study process, we found that actually the biggest issue is that there's a lack of strategic approach to research and data collection, and or in other ways, there's a lack of comprehensive and profound understanding around methods to capture and to report data. And maybe in some more extreme cases, actually there's a lack of culture of data collection within the federations. So we realize that this actually has become a very important project for us, as the federations, they need to justify the money they invested, they spent on those sporting events, and also they have to demonstrate the value or return on investment on that. As a result, we decided to bring this project one step further, and we decided to have Iain on board with us as our consultant to explore if it is possible for us to have to establish a standard set of data points which can be used to cost effectively assess the sporting events and also be accepted by the industry in the meantime. So that's pretty much it from me to give you some context of this project. So now over to you, Iain.
Thanks, John. And just to give a little more background of sort of the world of events, particularly for ASOIF members, the Olympic Games, Summer Olympic Games member federations, many of them have their World Championship events and World Series events, and they're of a bit of a different scale and size. And particularly when it comes to relating some of the other big events in the industry, you can see the huge range of types of events, from indoor venues to outdoor venues to multi-day events. So to have a sort of a standard approach that fits all of these types of events is a challenge. And particularly when you think about including the sort of lower level events of World Series, National Championships, Age Group, Masters Championships, having some standard that can be applied to all is a challenge. I mentioned the fact that this project has been going on this year. Since March of this year, we've consulted with event host organisations, and more of that in a moment. Rights owners, some of those that you see with the logos on screen now. Industry providers, including James at Deloitte and others, some of those you'll recognise, but also academics and specialists at universities and other specialist consultancies that have much more in-depth experience about measuring outcomes in particular. I mentioned that those event host organisations, IAEH is a member-owned body, as I said, of which I'm a director, alongside Paul Bush, Shelley Edwards, and others. This is a list of member organisations. They're all not-for-profit organisations that represent either cities, regions, or countries around the world. So we're able to bring a perspective as to what is important from measurement point of view from those public investors in events, in addition to the perspective there may be from private investors in events. In 2018, IAEH published some guidance, and it's available on the website address you see there. Some basic principles, some core terminology around the measurement of an event. And I think the key thing to recognise here is that quite often we talk about inputs, and it's much harder to sometimes measure the outcomes. So in the journey of a preparation for an event, it may be that we're preparing to train a number of volunteers, but quite often communities and investors in events want to know the impact it's had on the community as a whole, and what difference has an event made from an outcome point of view. So the guidance that's included on the website just recognises some of this terminology and also sets out 3 key principles about in every example of reporting on impact. You should always be objective driven against the goals that you have for an event in the first place. Always talk about the additional benefit the event brings, and recognise that you should always have some basis, evidence based on robustly gathered data. Also in that guidance is this framework which shows the types of possible outcomes that events could make a difference to. And these are all the reasons why we, as stakeholders in events, get excited about these events. Not every event is going to make a difference in all of these areas, but certainly the very big ones probably do have plans and an aspiration to make a difference in all of these areas, and some of the smaller ones may focus on different aspects in particular, like community impact at a local level, for example. So online is a glossary of terms against all of these areas, but the key challenge is how do we provide data and evidence and metrics to help inform decision making around hosting events. Back in June, we carried out a survey of some of those IAEH members, and this gives you a snapshot of the challenge in the project, and said if you had 100 points, allocate those 100 points against these commonly recognised areas of outcome that come from events, and this is the result of that survey. So approximately a third, were attributed towards economic impacts, a third towards image, reputation, so that media reach side, and not an insignificant proportion against sort of social outcomes, and probably a growing number against environmental outcomes as well. So the next slide then says, okay, how much data and what evidence do you have satisfy, be able to explain the return on investment in these areas. And the level of satisfaction for economic data is relatively high, and even for media is relatively high. 60% said they were satisfied, but in terms of satisfaction of what data was available, there's very low levels of satisfaction around social and environmental objectives in particular. So that's some context. Taking that framework of all the types of benefits that an event might bring, what we then did is to sort of try and base the work on a model framework. The idea of this triple bottom line, as it's called. If we think about those inputs and outcomes, the outcomes that here are some of the outcomes that people might reasonably expect to have from an event. The economic ones, quite often that immediate tourism and trade benefit and the direct economic impact from tourists attending events. And then some of the recognizable differences that an event might want to bring from a participation point of view for sports events. There's an aspiration that having an event may influence more people playing sports or more people having a healthy outcome as a result. But also wider, sort of what difference does it make to a local community? More engagement, more inclusivity in an area, and perhaps also to make a difference to people's attitude towards environmental responsibility. So these are the sorts of outcomes that people may have as a result of an event, but as I said before, it's often quite difficult to measure. So what we've done is recognize that there are inputs, there are certain things that you can measure that an event works on and has, that maybe shows these are things that contribute towards. So by measuring these things and understanding the link, then that goes some way towards being able to influence decision making in a positive way. When it comes to measuring outcomes, the economic impact is quite well established. There are methods and systems outside that recognize how economic benefit can be measured, but it's much harder to do that for sort of the tourism impact longer term through media, possible future tourism, and even harder to do that through social return on investment. So if it can't be done through quantifying that in a monetary way, could it be done by understanding the impact on carbon footprint or the UN Sustainable Development Goals? So this next couple of slides talks about the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals that more and more often international cities and regions are looking to structure their policy decisions around the difference that they make towards these goals. This next, not all 17 are related to events, and this is a sort of a snapshot of some that are, and there's a major piece of work being carried out now by the UNESCO in collaboration with the Commonwealth Secretariat to work on indicators that governments will recognise how sport has made a difference towards these UN Sustainable Development Goals. So the work that we carried out this year has also recognised this and aligned with this piece of work, and that's something that will be presented to international sports ministers when they meet at the summer of next year. So this is, the more detail will be shared in the next spring, as I mentioned, but that detail will include a list of potential KPIs. So this is, these two slides contain these potential KPIs that can be measured and some guidance about how they're measured. And a lot of these aren't particularly complicated and may relate to either input or output from an event, and only a few relate to outcomes. But this is a framework that can be adopted, and as you can see, it makes reference to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. But the guidance that will come from this will say, okay, events in future, if you're able to articulate your objectives, be clear about who you want to make a difference to, or then refer to this list of standard KPIs that are, can be clearly measured in the same way, and then use this data both to drive decisions, but also then to help benchmark between events and to aggregate up to show the difference that events have made collectively. This was some feedback we had from the academics and the people on those logos on that slide. People that had looked at the detail valued a broad list of a menu, if you like, of KPIs, and think it will be useful when we start next year, but that it's important to have clear guidance as to how each of these measures is actually captured, and that will come out in this guidance. But they also said that it would be good to have some core KPIs, some very simple KPIs that can apply to all events, and that help provide a toolkit to people to do that. But also, finally, some of the academics said, when it comes to articulating the long-term outcomes in a much more detailed way, take lessons from other public policy areas and recognise that other industries can't do this particularly comprehensively, and they often use relatively broad research and information gathering to make their case for investment. And so the important thing is to be transparent, is to share some of those, how information was gathered, and do it in a consistent way, and that will help make progress towards being able to articulate and make the case for investment in events and work on delivering long-term outcomes. So in terms of those core KPIs, we've carried out some further survey work across different types of organisations, and this is a snapshot of some of those responses as to what people would regard as core KPIs. And here is again a snapshot overview of some of those things that could be regarded as simple core metrics that every event gathers. And again, this will come out in more detail next year. So the idea is that whether you're a small event or whether you're a large event, we can at least gather some of these things in a way that helps drive good decision making and more detailed scrutiny of what needs to be done to make a difference in these areas. So the final couple of slides in this presentation, just the benefits of using these standard KPIs are that it can potentially simplify project briefs and procurement briefs to make it more cost effective to gather some of this information, but more importantly to help create benchmarks that can help drive continuous improvement and learn how to make a difference every time as a result of improving scores. At the end of the day, it will also be an ability, by collecting things in the same way, to be able to aggregate up across a program of events. And this is just an illustration of how that might be done in a very simplistic way. So the final slide here now is to say the next steps for this particular project are that in the next few months of 2021, there'll be some pilot data gathering of some of these KPIs across International Federation events and some of those IAEH members, looking back at events they've hosted in, say, 2019 and seeing, creating some benchmarks for different types of events and being able to share some ranges of what you might expect is a reasonable value when it comes to measuring these KPIs. And as I mentioned before, producing that in a report ready for the time when events are able to more actively start again, perhaps with spectators, audiences as well. There'll be some support to adopt the recommendations for the organisations involved, and actually then this can be a conduit to help make the case for longer term research that will help be more sophisticated tools to deliver some valuation figures for intangible event impacts. That's a bit of a race through some detailed slides, but what I'll do now is introduce our panel. And as I mentioned, we have Kim from wonderful Copenhagen, Mark from EventScotland, James from Deloitte, and Maria from World Athletics. So starting from a host's perspective, Kim, maybe you first. Just give us your perspective on how you think being able to gather information more consistently and across different events will make a difference to you.
Thanks, Ian, and thanks for inviting me. There's a lot of very good reasons to be involved in this project, and we see a lot of reasons to work in this direction. As you mentioned, the whole talk about measuring needs to be more standardized. We need to have more ways to measure, and from our perspective, we will gain a lot of winning when we make it possible to actually compare the different events from each other. When you have some valuation which we trust and which we know how to use, so that it will kind of be the same language we're talking. That's actually the main reason to be involved, and how we see it, that we can use it in the work in the future. I think the slide you had about the triple bottom line framework is maybe the most important one. There's been a tendency to talk much about bet nights and some economical measurements, but we need it to be broadened out. We need to have ways to measure on all the other aspects which events can bring. So that's maybe the most important perspective to be involved in this work.
Thanks, Kim. Yeah, that sort of triple bottom line approach will be very familiar to you, Mark, from somebody that's been involved in the UK leading work on event impacts. So perhaps you could give your perspective about how you see this being relevant.
Thank you, Ian. Good afternoon, everybody. As Ian said, EventScotland is one of the partners in the UK Event Impacts project group, if you like. So there's a website, long-established website now, eventimpacts.com, which we are partners with colleagues in UK Sport, Welsh Government, Tourism Northern Ireland, London and Partners, and also the UK Government Ministry for Digital Culture, Media and Sport. What that Event Impacts Toolkit does is provides, as it says, it's a toolkit that event organisers can use to measure the social, economic, environmental and media impacts that the events can generate. So there's obviously a clear synergy there between the work that eventimpacts.com has done thus far and continues to do with this work that's been developed through IAEH as well. I think from our perspective, another thing just to note is that the consistency of terminology used is really important. I think one of the first things that we always kind of ask ourselves as event hosts is, what impact will this event have? And while hopefully you're always able to get that information from the rights holder, it's important that that's expressed in kind of consistent terms that are translatable and relatable to your environment. Not accepting that one event host's experience might be different from another's in terms of the size and scale of events that are being staged. And it's important to have that consistency of measurement available to people, I would say.
Thanks, Mark. James, from somebody that that maybe does some work helping provide events with data, or do some data gathering yourself. How do you see this overlapping or not with some of your core work, if you like?
Sure. So we wouldn't typically offer, when we're working for rights holders or event organisers or governments, for example, an off-the-shelf service, as it were. The reports we produce are typically sort of commercial, marketing or lobbying reports. They're not like a statutory audit like you do for a financial reporting mechanism. So we would typically tailor them for a specific event or rights holder, depending on the ultimate purpose of that report. But having said that, we would still typically collect all the main KPIs, as you've discussed in your presentation previously. And following on from Mark's point, we essentially follow the event impacts methodology wherever we can. So there's already hopefully some consistency there already. And I definitely agree with Mark that there's synergy with that approach as to the work that you've done, Iain, along with ASOIF and IAEH. So in short, we'd definitely be happy as suppliers to align to common reporting metrics, but within the context of still delivering reporting that meets our clients' commercial and strategic objectives, really. So that's ultimately our job, is to deliver what our clients, what the rights holders, what the event organisers need to see. But a big advantage of a centralised, agreed metric gathering approach is the comparability point, as you've raised previously, in terms of benchmarking both against previous versions of your own events, but also in the wider context of other events globally. Because at the moment, on a global basis, there are a variety of different methods used and metrics used, which can make comparability on a global scale quite challenging. So that would be the main advantage of this approach, as far as I'm concerned.
Thanks, James. Maria, it'd be good to get your perspective, and particularly the work that you're doing more generally, more widely with World Athletics at the moment.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Iain, and hello, everyone. And thanks for inviting me to take part. At World Athletics, we have, so we actually have to organise 7 major championships in a 2-year period. So it's actually a very sort of diverse range of sporting events, and I think we can all acknowledge that that finding hosts is becoming harder and harder. It's a very competitive landscape. So finding making sure that the benefits are really clear to the host city and the other decision-making parties within the group has been something that we have been looking at separately. The conversations that we've been having with potential host cities have really started to show that the economic impact is only one part of that measure. So being part of this group and really seeing that actually the other, the social impact, the environmental impact is just as important for host cities. And so for World Athletics, we have recently just published our 10-year sustainability strategy, and part of that is obviously going to be how do we deliver more sustainable events, and therefore how do we measure a consistent approach across all of our events that we can kind of benchmark, but also help host cities make an informed decision around what hosting benefits there could actually be. So and it also helps for us, and I think for all events, is how do we start to track the legacy? What's the long-term benefit of hosting any one of our events? And it's again, whether that is a healthier community or an infrastructure legacy, whether that is actually community cohesion, the types of measures that we can all input into as including into this framework, I think will benefit us as a sort of a global set of organisations that are responsible for hosting events. So we're kind of really pleased about sort of creating a set of standardised KPIs for that.
Thanks, Maria. I think what's been clear through the project is actually the steps that we're able to take collectively are probably relatively small, you know, not too sophisticated to begin with, so that some of those measures might be quite simple. But everybody kind of wants to know, well, what's it worth? You know, apart from the tourism value, you know, what's it worth to make a difference to societies, or what's that legacy impact worth? And to do that in any rigorous, meaningful way is an awfully expensive job, and can be an awfully you know, long-term job that almost goes beyond the time frame of being useful, you know, for decision making. So you know, Kim, do you have any thoughts on whose responsibility it is to do some of that measurement or gathering? And, you know, is it the right owner's job to tell you some of these numbers, or is it your job to find them out yourself?
I think it's maybe all of us responsibility, because I think the effect will be different whether it's in Paris or Copenhagen or Los Angeles. So the different numbers, in my perspective, is maybe not that important. Of course, they say something about the event, but it's much more about why and which, and how does it actually fit into our perspectives. What is it that we want to gain from the event, not what the event can give to us. So I'm very much in line with Maria. So we need to be able to compare the different events, but all events has some benefits, and we can't say, okay, when I pay X amount of money, I get this, because it will depend on where it is and how we do it and how much money we put into activate it. So so I think if we come together and actually do the measurements together, so that the numbers from Copenhagen can be used everywhere else, both from a rights holder perspective and from a city perspective, then it starts to make sense for everybody.
Yeah,
Makes sense.
Thanks, Kim. And Mark, from your perspective of you know, having done some of that gathering of economic impact data, in particular from the experience of event impacts, you know, can you see this being practically applied, where you do gather other metrics consistently and use that to help drive decisions and what you do?
Yes, absolutely. And I think one of your slides was really interesting earlier on, where you showed that pie chart with the relative importance of the different kind of impact areas, if you like. And you know, while economic was by far the largest, and then image was next, I think. Social impacts were, you know, around about 20% from memory from that slide. Now, I wonder if you'd done that same survey maybe 5 years ago, whether that would have been quite the same breakdown in terms of the levels of importance. I think, you know, certainly in terms of that social impacts, I think it's certainly within the UK context, it's really becoming more important, I think, to government agencies to demonstrate those benefits that events can also hold. You know, increasingly we're asked to demonstrate and make those linkages with different policy areas and where events can have impacts upon health and well-being, or community engagement, or transport. Look at something like Cycling World Championships in Scotland is that a transformational opportunity to get more people cycling. So I think having that consistent set of KPIs and that measurement for framework, I think, is helpful to everybody, both as the rights holders and the potential hosts, so that, you know, the event is being delivered for you know, to everybody's mutual benefit.
Yeah, I think your reference to the proportion of that was attributed to social, you know, impacts on that pie chart potentially has gone up recently. Well, a question from John Coxer-Smith on the chat is, given the importance of climate change, isn't 10% priority against those environmental issues naive, or do you think where do you think that might go up? Do you think that area in particular might become more important in future. Mark again, I guess.
Thanks, Ian. Do I think that will become more important? I think the answer is yes. Undoubtedly, the answer to be yes for that. How, I guess, we are always thinking about the environmental impacts that events have. Even in a recent example of an event that I was involved in required quite a lot of temporary overlay and temporary power, for example. Now, I don't necessarily know what the future might look like in that sense, but there's a decision for us, I think, as event hosts, as to what steps we can take to minimise and mitigate those environmental impacts that events do have. And
just coming on to the question of how information is gathered, and Maria, from your point of view, the data that you've looked at with your project, I mean, whose responsibility do you think it is to gather some of that data? Is it the LOC in the case of those 7 individual events? Is it you as the International Federation? Is it the local stakeholders? Whose responsibility do you think it is to be able to sort of gather that information?
Well, I can only sort of say from a World Athletics point of view, I think it's important that it's actually going to be all of those people responsible for at least collating that information. There will, but if by applying the framework means that we get the data in a standardized format, so much easier for from our side, which will be around providing the analysis of that data and then turning that into the next story that we go into the next host city. So I think from our point of view, we are responsible for gathering that information. There are events, and therefore we want to know what the value is of hosting that event, and that's as well as the sort of the broader impact. But we will be, we would have to rely, and we do rely on the LOCs and other stakeholders who are also delivering other parts of the program. And it isn't, it's not just the event. That whether that's an outreach program, whether that's a kids program, whether there's often these are delivered by other parties, not just the LOC. It might be the partners that do it. But from our point of view, it's our job to collate all of that information. And as I said, if we've got at least that standard framework, we know what information we're asking for and also what we're receiving, so that we're not inundated with a huge amount of data that we don't really know what to do with, versus actually going, well, it will, I think, help everyone sort of crystallize what's important and an important measure.
Yeah, okay. And James, coming back to you, I mean, somebody that's can be in the thick of the detail, from that's your job, and you're a part of a big organisation that's renowned for doing that, and you've seen the project, and you've spent more time looking at that screen of those 75 indicators than the people watching this session have. Practically, how do you see that working in terms of who gathers what information and what's missing in that list? It's quite high level in that list. It doesn't include the rigorous analysis of long-term outcomes in that list, for example.
I think I'd agree with, in terms of who collects the data, I'd agree with Maria's point about it's sort of the whole team working on it, whether it be the rights holder themselves, whether that be an international federation or a national governing body, it'd be local partners, because they'll all have different their own different sources of data and have easier access to them. So you really need, often the local organising committee is the point organisation, which can feed into all the others, but everyone needs to be brought into it, really, I'd argue, rather than just relying on one sole party. And then in terms of the actual KPIs and how detailed they get, I think again, that depends on the specific purpose of the organisation that's sort of commissioning the reporting. If they've got a strong environmental focus, that would obviously be an area that you could focus in more, or social, or whether it be economic. again, I think one advantage of having the core components of economic, social, and environmental are that those areas that perhaps 5-10 years ago wouldn't have been considered, i.e. the social and environmental aspects, are now sort of being given, if not equal, then nearly as equal weight into the economic criteria. And we're definitely seeing that in the organisations we speak to in terms of requests for proposals. There's very rarely now a just economic impact study being commissioned. It's very much more socio-economic, social and economic, environmental and social. So the trend is definitely moving that way. So this initiative, in terms of giving the three sort of strands an equal footing in terms of their importance, is a trend that we're seeing in studies being commissioned and in the emphasis that rights holders are putting onto those various strands as well.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. And, well, time for another couple of final questions. One more from Guy Horn, one of the participants. Maybe it's for you, Maria, and Jidong. You might want to think about this as well. But do you see international federations, rights owners, evolving their direct relationship with fans via digital media to track travel and dollar spend, or is this all too commercial and outside the role as guardians of a sport? Yeah, you might need to read that again, but basically, I'll read it one more time. Do you see the international federations and rights owners evolving their direct relationship with fans via digital media to track travel and dollar spend? Because they might have a social media reach to directly engage with those audience. Should they use that reach to be able to track travel and spend, or is that too commercial and outside the role as guardians of the sport as an international federation? Maria, I don't know if you.
Yeah, I was just saying
that
one. I'll have a go. I'll have a go at this one. I think it does depend on the role of the international federation. I mean, for World Athletics, we are obviously the guardians of the sport, and a very big part of our roles and responsibility is around the governance and ensuring we protect we protect the sport of athletics. But we also have another very large is hosting is organising events. For us, they are we are the rights holder. We host, and for us it's the showcase. It's the window to our sport, and therefore we have to nurture and talk direct to our fans. So yes, in answer to the question is that we have to be able to do both. And we're already seeing the trends. We're already seeing that the ability to be able to talk direct to the fans and understand what their needs are, what their requirements are. It's not just commercial. It's actually making sure that the product is designed with the fan experience in mind. So tracking that data, understanding what fans want is just as important as to making sure that the athletes and the rules are adhered to from our point of view.
Jidong, anything to add from your point of view?
Yeah, probably I'll just quickly add on Maria's point. I think I absolutely agree with Maria's point that federations, they have to have the ability to engage their fans. Well, people have been talking about the governance of the IAEH for a very long time, but maybe they ignore the fact that in the future, the IAEH, they also have to be entrepreneurial in the meantime. So that means they have to use various ways to engage their fans, to increase the cohesion with them, so which can provide them with the opportunity to monetize from their events, so they can use that event to reinvest for the future development. So I do see the trend, and I think they have to be able to do both of the things that Guy has mentioned here.
Okay, thanks. And a final shout out for anyone else who wants to post another question on the chat box to the right of the screen. But maybe another final one for Kim and for Mark from your point of view. But you see data, you see information about different events, about your own portfolio of events, maybe your own events that were grown out of your own city or region. Who do you trust? What do you trust the data that you're given? How do you know that it's right? Kim?
Yeah, of course we trust most of it, but we do, of course, our own research, and we speak to other cities and people in the environment to know how much can we actually trust this data, and putting our own analytics into it. So I think the more data, the better. But it needs to be divided so that it's understandable and presented in a form which is possible to work with, because just a lot of data and a lot of really big numbers doesn't maybe give the best view of which actually is the effect from the event. But good and much data is, of course, nice to work with, and gives us a sense of valid data to work with. Because if we just have a few numbers, it can be difficult to know whether it's actually the right data or just a lucky punch. So.
Yeah, and I think that's something we're sort of recognising in the framework of keeping it relatively simple but broken down, so that it means people can interpret the information in different ways that's relevant to them, not just see a big number from another report and not really know what's behind it. But Mark, anything from your point of view to add?
I think I would just endorse what Kim has said. I think we would do something similar. Sometimes we'll do the research or commission the research ourselves. Other times we'll work with partners and use the data that they provided to us. We will give advice where we can in terms of what steps to go through in gathering the data and what sort of metrics to look for when gathering that data or collecting that data and presenting it back to us as a funder or as an event partner. So I think we're able to work with the event delivery or body or organisation or LOC just to make sure that they're gathering the data that's the data that we think is going to be useful and that will be useful to them to measure the impact of the event. Again, and maybe another little plug for eventimpacts.com, there are toolkits, there is advice there for event practitioners to follow in terms of how to go around gathering certain types of data. So there is help out there for people if they're wanting just to clarify exactly what metrics and measures they should be looking to gather and how best to go about doing so.
Thanks. I think we've got one more final question probably from the audience, but there's a perspective rather than a question really, but there's a suggestion that legacy is under prioritized and underdeveloped and under measured. It's a statement rather than a question, but Maria, you certainly touched on it as being something that's relevant to you, sort of being able to demonstrate the difference over time in different ways. But how do you think that can be addressed as part of this as well?
So it's quite a challenging one. I think the challenge for I get for rights holders is we obviously turn up, but we turn up in a town and we have the event and then we disappear. So the legacy is actually when we're long gone. So I think how I see us all being able to improve our legacy stories is if we do, by having these consistent measures, it sort of starts. It doesn't really matter what the sport is or what the event is, because actually we can start to track. If you have an athletics event one year and you have a cycling event another year, or and a football event another year, then actually we will start to see some trends on those legacy stories if we're comparing, we're measuring the same thing. So I think for us, our priority is around making sure that we do leave a lasting legacy, and that will depend on what is left behind, whether that is a safer running environment, for example, in a city, or a park run that is hosted every year after the event. Those are sort of quite tangible measures that I think that a city can carry on measuring as well, that then they can lead back into something that was ignited as a result of hosting an event. But I guess we'll only see that when we start to see the trends over time.
I'm looking at my panelists. Anybody else want to add on that voluntarily before I pin everybody down?
Yeah, and say, I think lots of the legacy work is, in my perspective, on the city or the local host, because I mean we're the one who works with it in the years to come. If it's Maria, if it's a single event, it will just come one time and then she'll head on to the next country. Where it's much up to us whether we want to create the legacy and put the effort into creating the actual legacy, where we can use the event as a catalyst to make an actual legacy.
Yeah. Please. Well, I think time for one final question. I'll direct it to Jidong maybe for sort of rounding up, but recognizing that cost may be a barrier, can we achieve economies of scale through standardized methodology and the application of these studies through reports?
So I think, Iain, from your presentation, I believe we're trying to produce here is relatively simple, not so complicated, standardized data points here. So I won't think that the cost here will be a big barrier in terms for our project here. And I think we're trying our best to cater to a different level or a bigger spectrum of the events here. So I think maybe this will be able to meet most of the expectations of the future clients, the future different organizations, I suppose.
Thanks, Jidong. Okay, well, maybe just time for one final word from each of you, really, as to the project for this collective work going forward, and the challenge of measuring impacts more generally. But do you think you'll be actively involved? And what's your message for those watching? Maybe James to begin with.
Sure. Yeah, very much like to still be involved, and it's been valuable being part of the research of the initiative so far. As I mentioned previously, we've essentially followed the event impacts methodology. So a lot of the core criteria we would have gathered for all the impact reporting we prepared anyway. But if there are any tweaks to that in relation to this centralized initiative, we'd be happy to take them on board, and obviously with the permission of our clients and rights holders, form any sort of collective information knowledge sharing initiative as well, which undoubtedly would create efficiencies down the line. One other area that I wanted to mention briefly was the point about digital previously. I think that's another area that can create efficiencies as well, particularly in the area of sort of research studies, whereas we at the moment typically either use interviewers on the ground to speak to attendees at events, or post-event online surveys to ticket purchase, etc. With the move to digital and people having tickets on apps on their phone, being able to pre-order merchandise and drinks, etc. on their phone as well, that opens up, obviously with GDPR issues to address as well, but does open up more efficiencies in terms of data gathering for events holders as well, in terms of getting data on expenditure, etc. So they're my sort of main two takeaways. Yes, definitely think it's a good initiative, and the efficiencies in future as well.
Mark, from your point of view, final thoughts?
Yeah, I'll just be quick with this one. I think, yes, as I said at the outset, as IAEH members and also with those synergies with event impacts work that we do at the UK level, then happy to still be involved. James raises an interesting point about digital, and I think one thing that this year has led, and one thing that this afternoon is showing is that digital is being used to deliver events as well. I think what would be interesting to just to think about those maybe as some of the metrics that might be needed to be set and defined for events going forwards, as well as how do we, the things that we'd normally count in terms of spectators and ticket sales and so forth, what are the equivalents that we would look to try and measure through digital delivery of events, whether that's solely digital or a kind of hybrid mix of live and digital.
Yeah. Thanks, Mark. Kim, any final thoughts?
Just a short one. We'll of course still be a part of the initiative. I think it's very important that all parties are gathered. So both have the cities and the rights holders, at consultancies or different parties from outside the small world, so that we'll have a broader perspective on the whole area, and as I said earlier, maybe actually create a new language for the way to do it, so that we'll have a more standardized and more acceptable way to do these measures.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. Maria?
Yeah, I echo what everyone else has said. I mean, it's already been hugely beneficial for us to be part of this project so far. So, and I hope it can continue because I think it's heading in the right direction in the way that we all have to measure our events. So I think it will be beneficial for all. We're happy to be involved.
Thanks, Maria. And the final word, Jidong, from you.
So of course we are the one who initiated this project. So definitely we'll just continue this work, and probably in the future for implementing the work and standards, we might rely on different bodies and different organisations to help this one to be implemented throughout the industry, not only just within the sports world. Thank you.
Okay, thanks to John. Thanks everyone. Well, there's no applause unless we can get that digital applause through the chat box. So thank you for your contribution to the session, and I hope everybody enjoyed it and enjoy the rest of the conference. All right.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.